Don't you love it when technology works? Hello and welcome everybody to the wide world of Warhammer. With us today, we've got two veterans of the Queensland 40k scene who have taken a bit of a deep dive into the fantasy realm. But we'll get to learn about them a bit further on. So with me, I've got the great bearded one, Ben Warrior. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, not too bad for a Wednesday night. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. No worries at all. You try to live out the Carl dream? Oh, not Carl. That's Votan. We're talking about what's the Thane's dream? Growing out the beard to the Dwarf release. You saw the Old World release and felt like, you know what? Let's grow it out.
No, it's just because I look like a 12-year-old without one. So
that's also fair. As well as maybe arguably the nicest guy in 40k. I mean, look, everyone says so. Zach the Glas. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, great, man. This wet weather, it's so good for rambling and painting, so I'm loving it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't hold us from doing any painting or hobbying, but there's still a pile of potential left behind me. I most certainly know. So, yeah, we'll get there though. We'll get there though. So, on the podcast tonight, we're going to talk about, I guess, Age of Sigmar. So, a lot in the community around here in Queensland, and so I've dabbled in myself as well. A lot of people play Age of Sigmar as well as 40k, and so I try and learn. I'll talk to these two fine gents about how they've sort of gone into the world of Age of Sigmar, obviously with 4th edition around the corner now. See how they found 3rd edition and what they've learned about it. But before we get deep dive into it all, Ben, for people who've never heard about you, maybe where have they heard of you? And what's your Warhammer story, I guess?
Yeah, so I've been playing pretty competitively since probably about 2018. Played for Queensland in the ATC or ANZTC in 2019. And then was selected for the team 2020-21 when we didn't play because of COVID. Went to WTC as a coach last year as well. So I've been around the competitive scene in Queensland for a while, travelled a bit, done a couple of the uprisings where I've done reasonably well with some skew admech lists. And then, I'm part of the Normal Blokes Club. So we just try and have some fun and play some good games.
Hooroo. Yes, I remember meeting you at the Uprising 2021, I think, or 22. You ran into Castellan Robots. That was a...
It was damn
that was a different...
I still have nightmares about
that. Zach and I played the last round before the pods at that Adelaide, and there's a very funny story of some deep striking multi-melters being killed on Overwatch, or interception, sorry, and then shooting back and getting 4 wounds through and then rolling 4 6s for damage and just killing 4 robots and then 1 robot killing his whole army. Average,
just average. Yeah. There we go. So that's awesome. So Zach, for people who haven't heard about you, so how long have you been playing 40k for, and maybe where people may have heard you before?
Yeah, look, I'm part of the Northside Alliance, which is a club far away across the river, and they meet up every Friday night. And as for what I do, I've been in the hobby since I was a wee lad, but competitively probably since midway through 8th, so a bit more recent, I would say, than some of the other gents that have been in around. And then over the last few years, I've been going a bit harder into the competitive side, learning the game, and that's how I've made a bunch of friends in the hobby, and did a few interstate trips, which has been so much fun to bunk with a bunch of boys. So went down to Adelaide a couple of times and around Victoria, New South Wales as well, and Newcastle as well. So yeah, been around a little bit more in the last few years, and it's been lots of fun.
Fantastic. That's awesome. It's always great to travel interstate and meet people in the wider community. Not easy to travel around Australia, but it's good to always meet people from other states and territories. So it's amazing. And yeah, it's good to see you being out there. So I'm sure many more tournaments in the future to come. But before we talk more about 40k, let's talk about Sigmar. So Ben, starting with you. So have you always been playing Age of Sigmar, or is this something a recent endeavor for you?
Yeah, so I've tried a couple times. So I've tried every edition of Sigmar. So I played a little bit in the 1st edition where, you had all the really stupid shit, like you get extra stuff if you jump up around and shout
wow. You have a bonus for the facial hair, mate.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so it didn't really click. And then tried it in 2nd edition, and again, didn't really click. Tried it in 3rd edition. We've got a local guy around up here, Nick Wright. He's one of the normal blokes, and he's hard into it, so he kind of dragged me along for a little bit, but it was right in that sort of period where I was really getting into the competitive 40k. So that took precedence. And with 10th edition, I'm not super feeling it. And frankly, the models and stuff in Sigmar, because I like to think of myself as a holistic hobbyist. You know, I like the competitive side, but also I like the hobby side. The models in Sigmar are just amazing. So I thought, you know, I'm not feeling 40k. Don't want to stop doing the hobby. Let's try something new. And I got asked to be in the event. We're going to talk about the team event, and that was all she wrote. More
than fair. How about yourself, Zach? I know you've been playing actually similar to Ben, but maybe a bit more consistently throughout AoS, or if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, probably just gone to a few more tournaments or got roped in to a couple more times. But like similar to Ben, I've kind of dabbled a little bit throughout the different editions of AoS. Played probably a bit more again in the last few years as a bit of a palate cleanser and just enjoying the models and the differences in gameplay and stuff. But yeah, mostly getting roped into team tournaments. Like there's been a big one that people get excited for is Runax, which is lots of fun. And now our club's gone recently into trying to run more of those events. So I've been finding myself more and more often kind of roped into being the last member of a team, or occasionally another one that we do as well is we're going to go to Toowoomba and do a little bit of a singles thing out that way as well, which will be lots of fun.
Yeah, no. So the Conquest of Fools, so it's an event in 2 weeks' time or so. Yeah, that looks like an amazing event in my own backyard. So it's very exciting. And look, AoS is popping. I know Australia's very popular with Age of Sigmar. I know for a while there, CanCon used to be the biggest Age of Sigmar event until I think one of the LVOs recently took it over, or the GW Open. So it's always been a popular system, but obviously there's obviously a stereotypical rivalry between 40k and Age of Sigmar. And look, I guess you two as 40k veterans, taking on the new game system, it's not very common for most people to play both. Like, sure, some people dabble, but it's not common to play both. So I guess what obviously Ben, you talked about previously before, you love the models and you're not feeling 10th edition, but was it a hard choice to sort of pivot and try and learn a new game system in AoS, or you didn't find it too challenging?
Obviously, still relatively new to 3rd edition, but I think a lot of the skills are transferable. And I find Sigmar is a more compact game. You know, because of the way the mechanics work in terms of you're hitting and wounding on a set dice roll rather than like a strength versus toughness. It's, there's a lot more uniformity across profiles. So, your average elite infantry is going to be 3s, neg 1, 1 or 2 damage. So it's kind of easier to get into, and it's also just sort of like asking those questions that you'd ask in a 40k game anyway. Like, obviously, even taking into account this tournament that we played and then the practice games we played, I've actually only played against 4 factions because I got thrown into Seraphon and Corner all weekend at this event. So my knowledge is still not great, but it's just that sort of, okay, what does your army do? All right, that's cool. I'll see how it goes.
Yeah, more than fair. So could you just explain that a bit? So when you say 3/3 neg 1 for 1, what does that mean? So unlike obviously 40k, it's a very different system in a sense.
40k, you have say you're making a shooting attack, you have your ballistic skill, which denotes your to hit roll. So it could be ballistic skill 3+. So that's essentially the same. So you have your to hit roll for Sigmar. It could be a 3+, could be a 4+. But the wounding mechanic is different. So in Sigmar, you have a set wound roll. So it doesn't matter if you're shooting at a goblin or shooting at a bloodthirster. If your wound roll is a 3+, you wound on a 3. So rather than having that sort of, my strength is 4, your toughness is 4, so I wound on 4s, or my strength is 5, your toughness is 4, so I wound on 3s, it's just a set roll, which is the thing that, it's kind of been the thing that I've had to get my head around the most. You have these armies and you look across the table and there's like 4 bloodthirsters or all these big monsters, and I'm like, how the hell am I going to kill this? And then I realize, I still wound them on 3s.
Yeah, like makes it a bit of a difference, hey. And like unlike the days, I guess, fantasy 9th edition, 8th edition, where you had, I guess, weapon skill, ballistic skill, and you had strength and toughness, where some things you could just never hit, or you'd hit on a 6 and you have to roll a 4, and then you roll the same thing for the comparison charts. At least that goes all by the wayside, and you've just got the set values. So very different in a way.
Yeah, and then obviously your neg 1 rend is the same as your AP in 40k.
Yeah. Correct. And I think also it's very different in Sigmar. And like without going to too technical rules, otherwise we'll be here forever, is damage it rolls over. Like so like if you have a 3 damage weapon and you've got like a 2 wound thing, like 3 damage goes 2 damage to the one thing, and then 1 damage rolls over, which is a bit different. There's a lot the fun colloquialism, simplified, not simple, in a lot of ways, like that 10th edition has. There's some there's some things in Sigmar which I like how simplified it is always, or it just cuts out a lot of the technical stuff, but there's still complexity to it. So, but Zach, why do you play Sigmar? So what drew you in, and how have you found the process of learning it?
Yeah, look, I just want to jump off what you said as well. Like, it's also just a lot more compact and faster for a lot of reasons. So, a lot of the main skill sets of the game are pretty transferable between different systems. So you jump in and they're like, oh, look, I mean, there's, apart from the experience side, which is like, how much do I know the matchup in my army? The actual basics of the game, once you learn the 2 or 3 like kind of key points that are different, big thing being like the engagement range is 3 inches. There's some moments like that, but apart from that, it's all about movement, positioning, army construction, how to play the mission. Like, a lot of that stuff transfers pretty easily over, and the models are just sick. I'm a fan of the old fantasy archetypes, and they've just been turning it up to 11 with a lot of the sculpts and a lot of the armies as well. The level of hobby is like beautiful. Some of these people really get into and are attracted just for the models themselves. So you get some really fun moments where it's just fun to take a step back and just take some photos of the game, and it's really cinematic. The other part that I like, particularly with the third ed, and this might just be my experience, but I've been having more fun in that it fills a lot of the melee kind of side of the game, which I was feeling was a little bit harder or different in 10th, and there's still play there, but there's a bit of local and with my friends particularly, some people are not feeling the rule set as much, and AoS is a very easy one to kind of jump in and say, hey, you like just where shooting is more of a back piece and there's lots more melee, come and try this game. This is a fun brawl in the middle kind of style thing, and with lots of cool centerpiece models, and that attracts a fun kind of crowd to it too.
Much more permissive, even from 9th edition melee, like in terms of how you pile in and where you go and stuff. So
100%.
It brings a lot of that jank back that we missed from old editions of 40k.
Yeah, look, I've had like 2 games recently where in the charge phase where I roll my charges and I have to base models, and it pisses me off so much. Like, it's like, God damn, I have to pile it this way. I have to go through 10 layers of hoops to like manipulate the charge roll. Whereas, like as you said, 9th edition, and I understand AoS, it's a lot more permissive, and you can do that skill expression a lot more. So that's great to hear. And I guess so you just talked about a bit there, Zach, about the hobby, and obviously everyone loves pretty models, right? And obviously with the recent Gold the Demon, we saw some pretty models that were shown off. So there's always a stereotype that I guess Age of Sigmar models or hobbyists are better than 40k ones. Do you feel that to be true? Maybe starting with yourself, Ben. Did you find that the army display was much better than, I guess, traditional 40k, or that's a bit of a stereotype?
I think it's probably a bit of a stereotype. Like, there's obviously different levels of skill in the hobby across both systems, and I've seen some amazing 40k amps. You got like Uprising or VTC, and people have got huge display boards, and their armies are immaculate, pristine, looks amazing. But then the same thing is in Sigmar as well, and I don't necessarily think it's a player or hobbyist slant. I think it's that the model sculpts themselves lend it to be more impressive, I guess. Like, you look at a Space Marine, he's in power armor, it's all flat panels, and you can do some stuff with it, but then you go and you look at like the Alariel model or Archaon, and it's just a different level. But I think that it's the model rather than anyone's particular hobby or paint skill, and that's not disparaging anyone. People do amazing things with all of it, but I just think the models are cooler in the fantasy setting.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I think it's a very brand new setting, and obviously a brand new area of IP for Games Workshop, and not limited to a lot of, I guess, the history and lore, like for Horus Heresy and stuff like that. So they have the free reign of how to do things, and obviously much newer sculpts generally. So it allows itself to be better displayed. How about you, Zach? Do you think that the stereotype's true, or are you sort of 50-50?
Oh, look, I mean, I think it's more so that the game itself attracts and appeals to a different crowd of hobbyists and people. I think that it's a lot of the fantasy, being a fantasy-based game, it's a lot easier for newcomers, especially, to draw a comparison and say, oh, cool, I've heard of elves, I've heard of dwarves, I've heard of these stereotypes that are or tropes that are ingrained in our culture, and I think that kind of draws in a wider perspective of people that just want to come for the cool models, and they have more points of reference, and then I think that just also, with, like Ben was saying, just a lot of armies, nearly every, or most of the armies in AOS have some variety of cool centerpiece or terrain piece or some like cool center to their army, and I think having that as like a little focus does just push people to not necessarily saying that the level of hobby is different, but they just try a little bit harder. They're maybe a little bit more enthusiastic about painting this thing because they're just looking forward to it, because it's such a cool model or such a cool sculpt. And I think it just brings out people holding on to the collections, and also putting a little bit of extra oomph where otherwise they maybe wouldn't, just to kind of show that it's theirs and feel some sense of ownership over it, is what I've experienced personally playing a lot of the AOS community.
I find the armies are smaller model count wise as well, especially if you're using those big god tier models. So people obviously have more time to put effort into them.
Yeah, and I think obviously, so AOS, they use like a 2,000 point scale, but for example, a god model like Archeon, the Everchosen, is like 800 or 900 points, or like Nagash is like similar point level. So
they're like half your army, man. Like, it's
big. Yeah. But they do a lot of work, or they can do a lot of work at various times of the AOS meta. So I guess for context as well, like I listen to pretty consistently like Warhammer Weekly, so Vince Venturella, like I've always listened to that generally pretty well, and I do keep my finger on the pulse of AOS, but I don't play it nearly as I had a decision point, I guess, the start of second ed. I was like, do I play OS or 40k? And I decided I'm going to dedicate to 40k. But I always like to keep my finger on the pulse and listen to things and try and learn some stuff. So hence why let's talk to you guys about it all. And I'm sure I'll pick up some things as well, and others as well. So I guess, obviously, look, being both 40k veterans, you dedicate a lot of time to learning the rules and stuff like that. So look, when we hear the term Armor of Contempt, we have a big, oh, cool, that makes sense. But how did you find, in like as a tournament setting as well, and in practice games, trying to learn different rule sets and asking questions? I guess starting with yourself, Ben, how did you find it as someone who's sort of newer to the scene? Did you find it hard trying to learn all these different concepts and rules, or not too bad?
So as I say, I think it's a lot of transferable skills for the core rules, in terms of, you still have your command phase, it's called the hero phase, but essentially command phase, movement phase, shooting phase, charge phase, fight phase, morale phase. So you've got that transferable set of skills. However, I think myself, I'm quite lucky in terms of I can read something once, and with like a 95% accuracy, I don't say I get it right every time, but I can recall most things. And when you combine that with the, as I say, that more uniformity of, I don't need to do the maths on strength versus toughness. It's just, that's an elite infantry. I can probably assume it's going to be some derivation of threes and neg one damage or 2 damage or whatever. Really quite helps. And once you have the basic, I guess, core rules down, I think it's really on you as a new player to say to that person you're playing, say, hey, I'm new. I said it at the tournament every game. I play a lot of 40k, but this is like my 8th game of Sigmar. What does your army do? Okay, does this. Okay, that's cool. I'll try and remember that. I know it's a tournament, but if I'm doing something real stupid, maybe just let me know. And the community's great up here in Queensland, across both systems. So we've really got that sort of, no one wants to win by gotcha. No one wants to, make someone feel bad about, you did something super stupid. So it's really just about that communication piece, I think, when you're new into a system. And as I say, when you've got a memory like mine that you can sort of pull things that, when it's even like, not that I know it, it's just, okay, that doesn't sound right. Do you mind showing me? And it's the same with 40. Sure. So for me, it was, as I say, I've only actually played against 4 factions because I kept getting thrown into the same ones at the team event, and my practice partner, Liam Hackett, was playing Khorne, and then I played Khorne twice. So I'm really good at Khorne now, but it's exciting. And, you sit there and someone told you what your army does and you've kind of forgotten it, and then they do it, and it's like, man, that's so cool. man, that's awesome. And you're like, okay, now I know, and now I can plan for something in the future. And, it's a casual event. We're going there for fun. It's the first event. It doesn't really matter if you want to lose. You just want to have good games.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. I mean, look, you would hope to think after however many practice games into core, I know what your army rule does. I know what these units do. So that helps a lot to sort of build that repetition and understanding a lot more. So how about yourself, Zach? So I know you jump between both systems. How do you try and juggle understanding the information for the game and learning things?
Yeah, I think in AoS it's really valuable, like any miniature game, to know your own army. But as Ben mentioned as well, the lack of modularity with the strength toughness, going from 40k to Sigma. If you know your own army really well, sometimes, with respect, it doesn't matter what your opponent does. Because you can kind of enact and do your own plan, and that's all at the end of the day you can really focus on. So I try really hard to know the rules and mechanics of my army, so both for myself, so that I don't have to spend mental bandwidth thinking about that at the tournament, and I can focus entirely on reactive play. What does my opponent's army even do? But also to explain my army, because as I found out, I ended up picking up one of the armies where no one bloody plays it. There's like 3 people in Queensland or something silly. So yeah, I ended up having to, through a process of learning my own army, have to explain and kind of guide people through that process a fair bit too, which was quite a funny experience. But apart from that, I would say there's a lot of transferable skill set, all of the kind of general mechanics of movement, positioning, knowing what kind of questions to ask. That doesn't really change. And also, AoS is a lot more compact. The app is awesome. I love that you can see... it's kind of similar to what 10th Ed has, in that you can see like all the index factions, but all of the factions, even those with books and battle tomes, they remain accessible for at least the war scrolls. So during my opponent's turn, it's super convenient and easy for me just to flick through, see where all the buffs are coming from. It's all pretty good quality of life there. And also just the way the fundamental game works, it's a lot less in the way of moving pieces. You typically have a bit more time in your rounds, just due to how much more speedy and streamlined some elements of the game are. So you just generally have more time to think. And additionally, the way that stacking buffs works is there's some, prohibitations where you can't stack multiple things and get them to absurd levels as much as, say, in 40k. So you only really have to concentrate on a couple of things at a time too, which makes it quite an easy palette cleanser. So I typically find, like, once you've got the foundation down, playing 1 or 2 practice games just to get like the rust off and feel back for the system, and then you're pretty much good to go.
That makes sense. So good to understand. So I just want to elaborate a bit more. So with the app, my understanding is, so similar to, I guess, the 40k app, you said that your data sheets and your units, you can look at all the rules for, even the ones with codices, but your detachment abilities, so that what's the term that you use, your army comp? What's the...
It varies on the army as well. Like
Army
it's like
rule.
faction. Yeah,
Faction
army rule.
Yeah, or your battalion equivalent, like you can't see those, or the artifacts equivalent, or the enhancements. It's basically it's good in that sense, that you can see all the information.
But
I just want to elaborate.
You can still see the names. You can still add them onto things. You just can't see the actual rules. So, for me, I was playing a trolls list, which I don't have the book for, but I could add it all in and still submit my list without having to go manually, and then go and remember what the actual relics and stuff do from, I guess, other sources.
Yeah, and the kind of stuff that's locked as well is all typically like your artifacts and artifacts, relics, or like single spell choices and stuff that's really easy to read on a list. So you can be like, okay, these 5 things, what do they do? Cool. Everything else I can look up throughout the game.
Sure, that makes sense. I guess, so we've talked a bit more about how AoS, quote unquote, is simplified in a number of ways, but I hear from a lot of AoS players it's the most complicated edition they've had to date. Obviously, 40k has some complex editions in the past. Like 9th edition was like an absolute slug to try and learn on the fly, I imagine. Like for anyone coming in, it'd be a pain in the ass. But did you find, I guess, AoS to be that much more quote unquote simple, or is that just a stereotype that they have? Or is it's like simplified in other areas, but not as simple in some? Maybe start with yourself, Ben.
I think it's a fundamental difference of the game. I don't think it's simpler. I think aspects of the game are simpler, and then aspects of 40k are simpler. Like Sigmar is much more based around your movement and your positioning than 40k, because I find on the whole things move slower, and I find on the whole there isn't that cross table, I'm going to blow everything up. You know, we've all played those games of 40k, even on the, you know, the super dense boards, that people get angles and you just die. Or you know, even worse, you're on, you know, when we used to play in 8th edition where we didn't have the WTC terrain, we didn't have proper terrain, and you looked across the board and you saw a Tau army and you're like, all right, I'm tabled turn 1, doesn't matter what happens, this is terrible. That doesn't happen in Sigmar. And yes, there are shooting slant armies, and I know Caradon Overlords have been a bit of a problem recently, which has just been fixed in the data slate. But I think that's 2 or 3 rather than, you know, everything. Because I think you take World Eaters out because they don't have guns, and I think that you can build an army from any faction in 40k that will blow 2,000 points of enemy up on an open board. That doesn't happen in Sigmar. So
Sure.
You don't have, so it's movement based, it's slower, and it doesn't have that forgiving, okay, something went wrong, I can just blow you up. So,
sure, that makes sense. The lethality is not as insane there. How about yourself, Zach? Did you find like some elements of AoS simpler, or compared to 40k, or vice versa?
Oh, look, I would say streamlined in the way that the game plays. I would say most of the skill expression comes from positioning, predicting double turns and turn orders, and playing the mission. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a simple game. I think that's a little bit disingenuous. I think it's just all of the complexity lies in different places and scratches a different itch, I would say. But I think Ben's summed most of it pretty much up in that it's really just a bit of a discrepancy in terms of you know your movement, your positioning, and compared to 40k, a lot less lethality and movement shenanigans and tricks, and a little bit more of an honest positioning game.
Yeah, that's cool to know. And I guess obviously, so Nick Wright in the chat as well, alluding to it. So double the turn, double the fun, baby. So obviously we always hear the stigma that, because AoS got the double turn, it's not competitive, it's bad. And yes, sometimes, as you said, with Caradon Overlords, it's a generally dominating shooting army, and sometimes the double turn can be quite, I guess, polarizing. Do you think it's as bad as people make it out to be, or but yeah, is it as bad as people make it out to be? Maybe starting with yourself, Zach. Is the double turn bad? Does it make AoS bad?
No, I love it.
Fine?
I think it's a fundamental part of the game. I don't think that they will be removing it necessarily in a hurry. Maybe they'll change the way that some of it works. I know that there has been some incentive, particularly in different primaries and different missions, to favor who goes first or second, and I think that's a really interesting way to kind of look back into it and tailor the balance rather than touching the double. But I think the double turn is really there to give, it's a comeback mechanic, but also a way to position and be cautious about. So you'll see that quite often people that are behind will make Hail Mary plays playing for the double as a way to get back into the game. That helps to incentivize those otherwise what would have been a rough, slow chokeout or burnout or blowout game, and gives them a chance to kind of make an attempt to get back in there, even with a bit of variance. It also helps stop people that are winning from necessarily putting their boot down and crushing. You know, there is a lot of lethal units in the game, but if you push too far up and then the opponent does double you, and you're just left with wide open, parts of your positioning, it's really easy to punish some of that really aggressive play, if with a bit of unluckiness. So I think that the double turn is a fundamental part of the game. Some people approach it with, I only lost because I got doubled, or I only won because I got doubled. Sometimes that is true, but other times there are ways you can look at your own positioning and way that you interact with your list and the opponent's list. The way you design your list, who drops first, who is going first or second, is an important factor. And I really like having a bit of agency over all of those elements. And I think I'm also just a sucker of games that do like risk mitigation. Like, I do like that there's a bit of variance in the game, which is just up to dice. That is, at the end of the day, why I personally play a dice game. And I think the idea of playing around the dice kind of occasionally screwing you up is actually kind of fun. And sometimes it makes for hilarious moments, even on the losing side, where I'm just like, man, I just got creamed because this one guy doubled me. The Varan Guards sliced their way perfectly through my whole army. I bet that was really fun for him. And that's the kind of vibe. So you can, as long as you can have a good humor about it, I think it's still a good and fun part of the game.
Oh, absolutely. Look, as you said, it's a dice game and crazy things can happen. So, it sounds, yeah. How about yourself, Ben? Do you think the double turn's lazy, or is it's a fundamental good part of the game?
Look, I agree with Zach. I think it's something that you have to take into account, and it's a good mechanic for if you're getting thrashed, having an opening to get back into the game, and also if you are thrashing, having an opening for your opponent to get back into the game. You know, no one wants to play those games of 40k where you are on top of turn 2 and you're like, all right, I'm getting 20. Can't do anything about it. No, I've got 15 8-bound and Angron inside me, and I'm done. But I'm going to play for another 2.5 hours because that's how long it's going to take them to kill me. But it's something you have. The double turn is something you have to take into account. You have to plan for, and yeah, sure. When it goes against you, it sucks. You know, you're in a really tight game, and it's what your opponent needs to push it their way. But also, it's great when it falls your way as well. It's like as Zach said, this is a dice game. We play a dice game. It's not if I wanted certainty, I'd go and play something else. Don't know exactly what, but
Chess.
Yeah, chess. Yeah. There you go. Maybe we should add a double turn to chess. But yeah,
the meta's stagnant, mate. Needs a shake up.
Yeah, I really enjoy it, even when it's going against you, because it's something that again you account for, and it can be also a tool that you can use against someone. You know, if you've set up to not take the double turn and you get the chance to give it to them when they've set up to not take the double turn, you know, it puts it on them to make something to happen, and then you can take the double turn next time. Like, I think it's knowing when to try for the double turn, whether it's the turn 1 to 2 or turn 2 to 3 or even 3 to 4, is another sort of macro level of skill expression and strategy, which from my experience, which again is quite small, I find that potentially some people within the Sigmar community get stuck in their ways. You know, I want to go second so I can get the double turn, so I'm going to give you first, even when I'm on the front line and I've got 15 trolls that will make it into combat with you because we're playing that mission that we can deploy as close as we want. But I'm still going to give you the double. I'm still going to give you first, which lets me get, you know, an easy battle tactic, 5 points on the scoreboard, and I'm right in front of you. So I really like the mechanic, to be honest.
Yeah, and I want to jump one thing off on that as well. It's just like when the missions themselves touch on who goes first, second as well. Like, I love that, particularly in depending on which battle tome and not battle tome, General's Handbook you get to. You know, the option of going automatic, I want to take second to get the double. Some missions incentivize that. Other missions don't. They want you to be the first person to make that move. And I love that they've started to design some of the missions in that kind of direction. And I think that's a really good way to take it.
Yeah, sure. So could you explain me a bit more for, like, I guess, how that looks? So, I think I have a rough understanding, but like my understanding, like, so people who have made this the bottom of turn, they can manipulate the mission in their favor a bit, like, which is like to try and alleviate things. Is that correct? Like, they can maybe remove the objective or keep it. Is like, I know, one element of the mission, if I'm not mistaken.
For me or for Ben?
Oh, for yourself, you go, Zach.
Yeah. So basically, like, it's always dependent on which map pack you're playing, the General's Handbook. In this most recent one, there is a benefit for the person going second just all the time, in that they can choose. You know, it's the mission. The General pack is like Antdor. It's like an icy land full of magic, full of wizards. So you get a benefit for a wizard or a non-wizard character, depending on which one you want to pick. But a lot of the missions themselves have like a gimmick, and that gimmick could be, some objectives will blow up and remove themselves. Others will be, some objectives will be locked at specific times, or there's one really funky one where there's a big pulse and it just runs around the middle of the map and you have to go chase it. All of that kind of stuff is typically there's decision points to that and deciding on those various factors, rather than where I think 40k would often leave it to a dice roll of being like, oh yeah, this one's going to go here, this one's going to go here based off what we roll. Instead, they give agency to a player, and the person that gets agency is usually the one who's either going first or second, depending on what they want the mission to do.
Very cool. So yeah, maybe something to see in future endeavors for 40k. Who knows? Maybe get carried over. Was there anything, I guess, so talking more broadly conceptually about AoS versus 40k, was there anything in 40k that you think you would love to transfer over to Age of Sigmar? Like from like a rules perspective or the way things are done? Maybe starting with yourself, Ben?
There's nothing off the top of my head. I'd like to bring the piling mechanic from Sigmar to 40k, to be honest, bring that back. Just because the skill expression in the combat phase, I feel, has severely lacking at the moment because of the way the rules are written. I think it's good that they are independent systems, and as we've been talking, there's a lot of transferable skills. You know, you're still moving models, you're still rolling dice, you're still trying to manipulate that to be hitting on 2s instead of 5s and whatever. But I think fundamentally 40k is a shooting game, which is why the terrain is so important, and you know, not just being able to see the whole board is important. And I think Sigmar is fundamentally a movement and combat game. So I think it's a good balance. There's nothing off the top of my head that I go, I miss this from 40k.
Yeah, sure. How about yourself, Zach?
I think the only thing that I find myself looking at with Sigmar games, and this might just be something we're experiencing locally, is that a lot of the current terrain rules and setups, they really incentivize, you know, a pretty sparse amount, because it's, again, not a hugely shooting orientated game. That's usually more chip damage rather than blow you off the table in one turn. But I do always feel a little bit saddened when I've put a lot of effort into painting my army and my opponent has this dope centerpiece model and this beautifully painted army, and then we're playing on, you know, really flat, minimal terrain. I think that there is a home for some more rules and mechanics, whether that's through cover or some other elements. There were a few games in which my opponent actually asked not to use the random dice roll to determine the mysterious terrain, because they just didn't want to deal with that extra layer of complexity, and most of them wouldn't have impacted the game state. And I think there's a world for having a little bit more in way of terrain rules to bring it up to the level of the armies, so to speak. But apart from that, I don't think there's much else I'd want to change about the game at the very moment.
More than fair, more than fair. So I understand this. So this obviously, so talking about, so 2 weekends ago or 3 weekends ago, you guys went to a 4-man teams event. So the Math Hammer and Northside Alliance was a teams event. So it was a 4-man teams event. Both of you, was it the first time attending an Age of Sigmar teams event, if I'm not mistaken? Or was it maybe Zach, you've attended one before?
I've attended a couple previously.
That's my first.
Yeah, but Ben's first. So how does an AoS teams event differ from a 40k one? Starting with yourself, Ben. Like traditionally, obviously, was the pairing process different, or was the way in which scores are done different?
So it was pretty nostalgic for me, to be honest, because 40k seems to have moved to more 5-man and 8-man teams in Queensland and Australia, and I think the world, to be honest. So the pairing system was a little bit different to what we've been used to in 40k, but it's exactly the same as what we used to play in 4-man teams when we played 4-mans in 40k. So like, it's quite nostalgic pairing process of like when we went down to Newcastle for the Overwatch stuff, and when we used to play the old, like super old, like 2016, 2017 Titans up here in Queensland, where you've got you got your 4 guys, you place one aside as a champion, and they're out of the process. They're going to pair up at the end, and then you roll off. Loser puts a defender up, attacker puts 1 list into it, and they pair up. Defender chooses the table, and in this case, the mission as well, which was interesting. And then you reverse it. The winner of the dice roll puts it up. They get matched into it, and then the last 2 pair up, and the champions pair up. So that's essentially the same as what we used to do in 40k. So the pairing process was the same. The 2 missions was cool because I think the missions are probably more impactful in Sigmar than 40k, as Zach was alluding to before. There's more mechanics, more deployment types, more different objective setups, so it can really change your pairings in terms of, okay, this mission, like there's a mission I think I remember where you can't shoot past 12 inches. So when you're playing like an ogre list with 3 iron blasters, the big whack off cannons, and that was a list at the event, that list does not want to play that mission, so they almost have to be a defender so they can pick the other one. So that's knowledge that we can get pre-matchups and who we're going to put up if we lose the roll and stuff like that. So fundamentally, I think it's the same, and I believe they do the same with the 5-man pairings with the simultaneous defenders and then 2 attackers, and then the defender picks 1. But it was quite nostalgic to go back to the 4-man for me.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. Here, I know for AoS Worlds with the 8-man, so their World Team Championships equivalent, they did the same thing of they have different maps and terrain, missions for each of the pairing process. So, Zach, how did you find that process of having particular missions as part of the pairing process? Did you find that it's an extra level of complexity and
I really loved
interest?
it, yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was it added quite a few extra elements that screwed with particular teams, and also in some missions as well where entire teams had brought particular skew. And then they had hit a mission which punished that skew, so someone was going to cop a bad time. I think that the boys that organised the mission pack and the pairing process did a really good job. I think that there was a lot of thought that went into it, and I think they helped to scratch that nostalgic itch a little bit. The only other thing I want to touch on is actually it's actually the scoring and differential in points is a big thing, in that in 40k, you're always working from that out of 100. But in AoS, the scores can vary quite a lot in terms of what's the maximum amount from a particular mission. And some missions just naturally encourage, mega scrappy games with like very limited margins. And some other ones, your big scores, your big wins are, pumping out like, upwards of 30s. So I think what was really interesting was determining in a team's environment how many points is the differential for, the scoring from your 20 to 0, and trying to work that part out and fandangling that was a bit hard, because I think once you had all of those extra missions in play, you couldn't like pick and choose the particular missions that all scored more similarly to have that. So I think there's a give and take to it, but I liked having the extra mission there. For a bit of spice, like the one that Ben said, where you can't shoot or fly because there's a big snowstorm going on. My army hated that, so the first thing I did was beg my captain to say, "Hey, put me up as defender. I'm playing whatever the other one is."
So not this one. Just to confirm as well. So yeah, with obviously the terrain is not many as I guess in. I know this could sound bad. Is it terrain maps as like in differential? Like obviously in traditional 40k events, you have like a light, medium, heavy. Is that a thing in AoS, or is it not as bad with terrain?
I don't think it's as impactful. Again, I think it comes down to that there isn't as much blow you off the board shooting in Sigmar as there is. I found when I got to the event, you could look across the 4 tables and they were all themed, which was awesome. But you know, they're 6 to 8 pieces, roughly the same size, roughly the same location, which I think is why they have the different missions, because the terrain is impactful.
Got you.
And like Zach said before, he had a game where his opponent asked not to roll for them, and I had the same as well. Because realistically, I guess it's +1 to cast is probably the most important one, and I also had. I also had people say specifically, I want to roll for them because +1 to cast really helps my army. And it's not that I need terrain to survive. It's terrain has a funky effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I wanted to ask a question because I wasn't sure if with the missions and terrain, is there are they all independent of the process? Like I pick a mission and I get to pick a table, which obviously makes a force multiplier situation, or they're tied to the table, like this mission on this table.
No, so I think the defender picked the mission and then the table, but as I said, all 4 tables were pretty consistent.
Much same, yeah. So, and there was perennial AoS influencer, Nick Wright. So he says at the world's level there is a difference between the alpha and beta tables, so which refers to density. So good to know and understand there. So that's amazing. I guess so, Zach. So you talked about obviously the scoring is quite different, and I understand the differential works. So obviously, like in traditional 40k, like you 51 points and above, a difference of 100 to whatever it is. That's how the differential is determined. But AoS has a similar element, but it's how much is the difference between you and your opponent. But as you said, the scoring can be different. Like in a mission, you may only score a max of 20 points or 35 points, and that what your opponent scores is that differential. Is that correct to my understanding?
Yeah, so we had to have a bit of a think about, like in 40k, you have for teams, it's really easy because every mission always scores out of that max of 100, and then it's very easy to always have consistent, okay, a 16-4 always looks the same. Having said that, for a lot of the different missions in the AoS tournament that we played, we were seeing nearly all of the missions in play, essentially, because we had that 2-mission setup with the player pack. So we actually got through quite a lot of missions. And as a result, there were some particular ones where an average score coming out of that mission might be 25 or 30. That would be a big scoring game. And there were some other missions where primary was extremely hard, and the only way to score a lot of points is to bring a book that has good book tactics, really, like good battle tactics. And there were some of those missions that came out a lot more scrappy and a lot more low points. So we ended up deciding on a differential system based off like every couple points. And then we just standardize that. But I think that there's a lot more modularity in terms of the different missions and what an expected or normal score looks like for all of those different missions. So that could be a factor, maybe picking that in for certain particular future tournaments, maybe trying to find ones that score more similarly and put them together.
Yeah, sure. So I guess a question about that sort of pairing process, understanding more of that. So handing over to you, Ben. How did you find it? So obviously someone who hasn't played a lot of factions in Age of Sigmar, how did you find doing pairings for lists and factions you've never played against before and trying to do that pairing process and that differential? Was it really hard, or what did you try and do to give your, I guess, coach or captain the most pairing information you can?
Yeah, so my team was made up of myself, a couple of the other normal blokes, so Liam Hackett and Nathan Bleakley, who are both just got into the AoS, and we had Alex Terrison as well. So we kind of did it collaboratively, and we also, as I say, we've got Nick Wright on speed dial. So we had the lists come out, and some of us knew what our own factions did, and some of us knew what some other factions did just from like sort of reading and osmosis. And then we sat down with Nick, who's in Europe at the moment. So we called him up on his holidays and we went, "Hey, Nick, tell us what everything does." Nick told us what everything does and said, "All right, Ben, you're playing trolls. You should win against this, and you should lose against this and this." And that's what we put in the spreadsheet. So we took it pretty casually. To say it was our first event. We weren't like super hardcore on the pairings process, mainly because we're going off Nick's knowledge and not our own, which was very helpful. But yeah, it was really kind of we sit down at the table, in the gap between the events. Once we know who we're playing, we look at the 4 lists. We get get the app up, get Warhammer up, get the missions up, and then go, okay, I think I know what it does. I think I'm okay into it. Or no, this sucks for me, or yes, I should smash it, and we hope for the best.
Was that a similar circumstance for you, Zach? Was it just like a hope and I think this is what happens, or was it a bit more an elaborate process?
Oh, look, we definitely didn't do as much of an in-depth kind of spreadsheet or preparation, but that was a more conscious choice on our part. There's a lot of Sigmar players in our club in the Northside Alliance, and it kind of falls into 2 camps. We've got a lot of people like myself who are extremely basic knowledge, play their army, show up to a few events as the last person, and more rookie kind of entries to the scene. And then there's quite a few gents who have been playing it for a while. They've got a really good understanding of the matchups and the rules. And we hit a situation where we could have done the A team, B team kind of thing, and I definitely would have opted to go on that worst squad and just roll some dice. In the end, they decided to divvy up the experience and just try and, because we were running an event, we didn't want to go too hard at our own event anyway. It seems kind of weird. So it was more fun to divvy up the experienced people and have them go to each team. And I think that worked pretty decently. As a result, it wasn't as one-sided in any particular round. There was always a couple of people that had some good games, a couple of people that got thrown under the bus and didn't, but then that love was shared rather than having a dedicated shield. And it was a lot nicer, I think, for some of the rookies and people that hadn't been to many tournaments before or didn't understand the matchups. And I think we came out of it with a good understanding and sense of what our armies do and what the games were. Had a pretty fun time. It definitely didn't work so well from a competitive side. I think we were the wooden spoon, our particular team. We brought up the rear quite triumphantly. So I think if you were looking more competitively, you could take it seriously, but wasn't why we were there on that weekend.
It was a charity event as well. It was to fundraise for the World's AoS
raising
team.
some money.
So just go and have some fun, sort of thing. Throw some dice.
And we succeeded at that.
Yeah, that's all it's all about, right? We like to play with our plastic toy soldiers and just enjoy it, right? That's not doing anything too more seriously than that. So I guess we alluded to before, and I know you pointed out, I guess, a little bit, Zach, that it's a very different community and crowd. And so we have a question from Dale Sumner. He talks about, so can you give a genuine comparison of the player skill between the two communities, like both in the middle, I guess, of the park and the top level? Like, I guess from a 40k sense, most people think AoS players aren't as good. They don't know things as well. And like, you hear some stories of 40k veterans come over to AoS and win their first event or just dominate equivalent AoS players. Do you think that's a fair comparison, or like what's the comparison like between the two communities? Maybe starting with yourself, Ben, if you want it, as someone who's obviously been in that 40k scene for a while, how did you find playing in AoS for the first time and the player skill differential, if there was one?
Look, I think overall I'd say the 40k community is more competitive, not by a lot though. I think as we've kind of alluded to, I think there's a different skill set. So and I think mainly it revolves around that double turn. So I find that Sigmar players play quite defensively because, if you get double turned when you're playing aggressively, it can go from bad to really bad really quick. So, no one likes getting thrashed. So they play more defensively to avoid that. But yeah, I think it's a different skill set. I think as we've alluded to, it's much more movement based. It's much more positioning than 40k. And much less, I'm just going to run at you and blow you up sort of thing. So I wouldn't say that I've played at the top level of Sigmar. I've been to one event, so I could be talking out my arse here. I'd say maybe because I've been exposed to more competitive 40k that I think that they're slightly more competitive, but I don't think it's as big a gap as some of the 40k players would think.
Yeah, sure. I think that's fair. How about yourself, Zach? Did you think there was a big skill differential, or like in the middle of the road and top level?
Yeah, so I think that first of all, I don't feel super inclined to speak for the top level of Sigmar, but my understanding is that it would be an equal amount of competition. There's a lot of different factors to put into it, particularly with the matchup processes. I think that 40k does have the advantage in that it's just existed a little longer and had a little bit more time to attract those diehard and competitive people. And I think that if there was a discrepancy, it's probably just due to age. I think that there's quite a number of talented players in both communities. In terms of middle of the pack, I was also very pleasantly surprised and happy in all my games. Most people had a very good grasp of how to play the game and its fundamentals and the positioning. And any time that I did do well was really just holistic, like scale positioning and doing that kind of stuff. The general rules people were on top of and had a good understanding. So I didn't have any particular games where I went up against an opponent that had very little idea of what was happening, or if they did, they were equally new like myself, and we had a fun time learning together. I will say, however, that I think that AoS players also understand the double turn, and that is a boogeyman in some aspects, but it also teaches you to be a generous loser because you are going to lose a lot of games due to variance. And I did find that there were quite a few people where they would get the double, they'd say, "Hey, sorry, man," and we'd just like have a knowing look and be like, "Yep, this is going to happen. We both understand." Commence the slaughter, and there's that kind of like little gentleman's agreement being like, "Hey, I acknowledge that the only reason this is happening is due to a dice roll. Let's proceed." And that was quite nice. I did enjoy that little moment of hesitation and connection across the table there.
Yeah, I find one thing I did find in Sigmar is there is a lot less angst.
100%.
We've all played those games, and I've done it myself, where things aren't going our way, and we just start looking at the dice, and it's like, fuck these dice. Nothing's working. I should be doing better, and it just didn't happen in Sigmar. It's like, as Zach said, you have that. If I get this double turn, it's done. If you get this double turn, you're still in it. Or if you get this double turn, I'm done. And it's just, it happened. Cool. Let's play it. Let's move on. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, and I didn't have anyone being a dick about it either. Like it was all a pretty lovely experience, despite my army, not existing for the rest of that turn.
Yeah, well, that's great. I guess, and we've alluded to it as well before, and I think it's going to be a straightforward answer. But obviously, in recent editions of 40k, there's been a big improvement for sportsmanship and playing by intent, and like sort of discussing with your opponent. Did you find that similar levels of sportsmanship and intent was at Age of Sigmar? Maybe starting with yourself, Zach. Did you find does it still level camaraderie and working with your opponent? It sounds like a yes, but I just want to confirm if that's true or not.
Yeah, look, I definitely feel like there was a good understanding of giving everyone an understanding of what's happening in the game. I think that there was a little bit of in terms of pre-list, like running through your list. Hey, this is my gotcha. This is my gotcha. I think that as the community continues to grow, they'll more easily say, because I had a lot of people just try to read their entire list. And I'm like, hey, I actually don't care about the stat line of every one of your units. Just tell me this, this, this. And that seemed a little bit foreign to some people because I think they were over sharing potentially some of the tricks they had, and I had to actually say, hey, look, I'm happy to be surprised to some elements. So it's a good thing to their character that they're wanting to share so much. But in 40k, when I pick up and play a game, I would always have those 5 things covered by opponent without even having to ask. So I think it's just something that comes with time, to be honest. But I had great games, all of the sportsmanship, and there was no angst, and that was all really good. And I think just honing in on what is important information to share rather than just dumping is probably the only thing I personally experienced.
Yeah, sure. How about yourself, Ben? Did you echo similar sentiment and statements?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I didn't have that what Zach said about being over dumped on, because I was like, dump it all on me. Like, I want to know everything because I have not played this before. As I say, just no angst. Everyone was super happy. I think it is around that double turn, which I think is why it's such a good mechanic, because it can keep you in the game. It can knock you out of the game. And it's nothing someone can do. Like, unless you're playing, I think it's Archaon can say, this is mine this turn, which no one was playing Archaon. It's nothing that other person's done. It's just a dice at the end of the game. Yeah,
cool. Well, great to hear. It's always good to hear positive and inviting communities. That's what we're always all about. So we have a question in the chat, though. So obviously a little bit of a fan favorite. So we'll put this Age of Sigmar realm. So in Age of Sigmar, what is your favorite faction? So I think Ben, what's your favorite faction in Age of Sigmar? Was it the one you played at the event or a different one?
So I played Trolls at the event, which for anyone that knows me, is because I feel a kinship with them. I believe I am a dank cold troll. That was because basically I had no idea what I was doing. I started playing some Seraphon because the new Seraphon models are just amazing. And Alex went, hey, bro, Nick went, hey, bro, the Coalesced Seraphon isn't that great. And then Alex went, hey, bro, I've got this troll army, which is pretty good. Seems like it'll suit you. It's a bit of a castle, a bit slow. It's kind of what I have played in 40k. Like, most of my armies in 40k have been, Death Guard, Castellan robots, the the tough stand on the objectives, make you come to you, and just not die sort of thing. So it's very me. I'm currently building a Lumineth army, which sounds a bit different, being elves and airy fairy, but I am playing the cow people, which essentially do the same thing. I'm going to ignore all your rend. I'm just going to stand here and not die. So I'm breaking from tradition.
There you go. You're becoming an elf lover and enjoy it. And you make massive top hats, so that's all that matters, right?
Yeah.
What about yourself, Zach? So what's your favorite faction in AoS? And is it ogres, as Aiden's pointed out, which is his? So is
clearly it has to be ogres. The question says so. I actually got blasted off by the ogre cannons on the weekend, so I got a bit of PTSD from that. I did play an army I care strongly about. I played the Daughters of Cain. I have a lot of a love for the old fantasy game and a lot of the factions that came from that. So any of my favorites have kind of been slowly coming up over time. I've been continuously tempted to get into the Soul Blight Gravelords, as the old vampire counts was my jam. So I have been kind of tempted both in Sigmar and Old World for that. But I really enjoy, particularly with the Sigmar range refresh, the Daughters of Cain have all of the snakes, and I'd never really painted a lot of organic models before with like flesh and or scales or that kind of thing. I'd painted a lot of power armor and a lot of sleek Eldar stuff in 40k. So it was really nice to have that as a painting project, and then to get more and more into the lore of how Marathi kind of did her thing and took over Cain's group of people.
Hell yeah. I'm a big fan of the Daughters of Cain as well. And Ideneth as well, though. They'll be my two favorites. But I do have a Slaves to the Darkness army, which is going to get rebased for Old World, so we'll get there. But yeah,
how good is that?
Very much square bases.
How good is that new Slaves character on the Lizard, the one that got revealed just quietly?
So cool.
Yes.
It's very tempting.
Yeah. We did have another question in the chat. I think I referred to it before, but we unanimously agree that Age of Sigmar models are much better than 40k models. Like, I think across the board generally, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, yeah. Everyone's nodding in agreement. So
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. So I guess in the future, so it sounds like Ben, your Age of Sigmar fired. Do you plan on playing more events and playing in more Age of Sigmar events, or are you tempted by the Old World and going square based?
Look, I didn't play fantasy before, and it may be something that I get into when the High Elves come out. But I'll definitely be playing more Age of Sigmar once I get through the commissions I'm painting and can actually build my army. Just a bit time poor at the moment. And obviously don't want to abandon 40k either. It's not something that I want to stop playing permanently. It's just sort of a little break, and it's an au revoir rather than a goodbye.
Yeah, sure. So what about yourself, Zach? Are you going to play in more AoS events, or are you looking to play in maybe other game systems?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to continue playing Age of Sigmar. I have a lot of fun with it. I've enjoyed meeting the community and also getting an excuse to hang out with my more north side kin of the club, being like one of the few south side members. I probably won't be taking it supremely competitively, because that for me will always be 40k, and also it's a lot of headspace to try and competitively take a couple of games at the same time. So that's going to be competition. This is going to be fun and casual hammers. And yes, I am getting into Old World. I've already got an army, and we're running a league up at Northside Alliance to probably start of April, which is going to be fun. So
Hooroo! Yeah,
to that.
Yes, very much so. So feel free to plug it a bit more. So what's for people who are in the Brisbane area? So what is this league, and like what's it all about? It's like a slow grow escalation league, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
It is. It is a narrative escalation league over 6 weeks. Myself and a couple of other gents are organising and running it. You can, if you want to get involved, jump into our Discord, and we're going to be running that over a period of 6 weeks on Friday nights. It's a drop-in event, so if you can only attend 1 week, that's completely fine, and you will get a game of Old World square bases and probably match into either someone learning the game like yourself, or match into me who is not learning the game and is struggling to paint the models.
Yeah, fantastic. So that's awesome. And you alluded there before as well, Zach, and it's something I think myself I find conflicted in as well, because we have all these games we want to play, but we don't have the time to do so. So how are you going to try and balance, I guess, playing, I guess, your competitive endeavor in 40k, but plus your, I guess, side game in AoS or Old World? So what's your plan for it? Just like to take it one step at a time and be accepting that, look, you're not going to be as good maybe in 40k as you would because you're playing AoS and Old World as well? Or what's your process of thoughts behind it?
Yeah, I think that a big part at the moment of what's going to occupy my attention is planning around events and travel. I know that I want to attend a couple of 40k events later in the year again. So I will definitely prepare, get back into the hobby and kind of start looking more seriously leading up probably a couple of months before that point. But I always, like yourself, I like to listen to various different podcasts and creators and things. That helps me kind of keep my fingers on the pulse, even if I'm not actively, playing the game 100%. But definitely, if I was looking to take it competitively, I'd be putting in a good amount of practice leading up to that. But as for these other events, I'm really just happy, having a fun time and socializing and networking and just meeting people. Getting to know the AOS community has been really fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of them at Toowoomba.
Fantastic. How about yourself, Ben? What in the future? You said you want to play obviously 40k as well as Age of Sigmar. How do you plan on balancing the two? Because obviously, look, for most competitive players, you dedicate to one game system rather than two.
Lack of sleep probably. I'll probably stick with Age of Sigmar until AdMech can play 40k again. But once AdMech are playable, and I don't mean good, I mean playable, I will probably jump back to 40k. So I think it's realizing that we've got, there's only so much time in the day. Prioritizing, Zach said, there's an event coming up, need to practice for that. If it's a Sigmar event, I'll be playing Sigmar. If it's a 40k event, it'll be 40k. And just taking it sort of a month at a time, I suppose.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I know for myself, like last year, I played just to get know people more in the scene. I played some Marvel Crisis Protocol up in here in Toowoomba. It was a lot of fun. Just run some villains at people, just smash face, and behind me, I'm painting a Blood Bowl team because I want to play Blood Bowl in the future and for a local painting comp. It's just something I want to expand into. So I think it's more than fine to have a bit of a side exploration to something else. And even though it's maybe affecting you in one way or the other, I think it's fine just to do some things, and you do things otherwise which aren't as competitively inducive or beneficial because you enjoy it, right? It's a hobby at the end of the day. So fantastic. So Ben, for people who maybe want to dive back into AOS or learn about the game, what advice would you give them? Maybe if they've come from a 40k background.
Probably just be a bit patient with yourself. Like I say, even though it's all the transferable skills, it's a new system. There are differences. You're not, if you're going and winning majors and super majors or whatever in 40k, and then you go and expect to win super majors at Sigmar, I don't even know if they have super majors in Sigmar, but it's probably not going to be not going to happen. And you just set those realistic expectations, and just have fun. As you just said, this is a hobby. This is a game. There's very few professional Warhammer players, if any. It's not the be all and end all. People have lives, friends, family. It shouldn't be how you measure your self-worth. So just have fun.
Yeah, more than fair. How about yourself, Zach? Any advice for people who are influenced or maybe want to go try out AOS?
Try it out. Yeah. Get off the fence and give it a go. There's no harm in trying a new game system, or if this is your first, feel free to jump into it. People are very welcoming. I think that there will be a lot of loss. You're going to lose a lot of games due to dice rolls on the double turn and priority rolls. You're going to lose a lot of games because you don't know what you're doing, and that's fine. I think that the biggest thing you can personally focus on is expanding your collection of dudes or people, learn your army, and that's a great foundation to begin moving forward and going from there. Because if you have full grasp over your own rules, you're going to have a much, much easier time learning how to beat your opponent and how to play the mission.
You usually learn more from losing as well, so it's not necessarily a bad thing.
That's true.
No. Not at all. So, fantastic advice. So, really appreciate it, guys. Any final plugs or shout outs you want to point out before we wrap things up? So, maybe start with yourself, Zach. Any final plugs or shout outs? Otherwise, obviously, including the escalation campaign.
Yeah, I've had a good chance to express it already, but I'm a part of the Northside Alliance. We play Friday nights up at Northside, and I will be up there for 6 weeks starting from early of April.
Hooroo. How about yourself, Ben? Any final plugs or shout outs?
Yeah, so just the Normal Blokes podcast, as I'm part of the Normal Blokes Club. You won't find me on the podcast. That's a select few of our guys, but they've just released, I think last week or the week before, an episode around the team event we did, just doing a breakdown of how we went on our team. And I do believe as more of us play, I know there's more interest in Sigmar and the old world, that the content will be diversifying as well there. Don't hold me to that, though. I have no control over what they put out.
No, you said it online. It's gonna have to stick now, Ben.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to produce it now yourself. We're gonna hold you to it. So
Forgive me, Denise.
Yeah, that's okay. So yeah, the Liam and Nathan episode they did was fantastic. Learning, so very similar to this. They 40K veterans learning about Age of Sigmar and their experience. So I highly recommend people give it a listen and shout out. So fantastic. So before we wrap things up, obviously as part of Down 40K, we have some sponsors and plugs we have to say. So brand new to the circuit. So just to wrap things up, we have CxCustom 3D and Terrain. So they are the official terrain sponsor of the circuit, and they sponsored, I guess, the Down 40K. So just want to say thank you for all that. They're on Facebook and everything else. And all the other links and sponsors are in the description below. So Mperor for all your Warhammer goodies. So also use code DU40K for 20% off. And then D6 Designs AU. They get the special dice on Etsy and you use code DU40K for 10% off. So amazing. And obviously as well, if you want to support Down on 40K, there's a Patreon if you want to support, get early access to ticket events and support myself and other people who do podcasts. So really, really appreciate it. And just want to say a massive thank you to Ben and Zach for doing this. Really, it's been a great talk, and I'm more energized and enthused of trying out AoS or Old World in the future. So really, really appreciate it, and hope everyone enjoyed the show. Thank you so much. Have a good one, guys.
Thanks.